The dust-laden wind blew across the parched streets of Porterville, Arizona Territory, as Margaret Davis watched her family home burn to ashes in the early summer of 1883. Flames licked the evening sky, consuming the last remnants of her life with Joseph, her husband of 9 years, who had been laid to rest just 3 days prior after a sudden fever took him. Standing there, the 30-year-old widow felt the heat of the fire against her tear-streaked face, her soul as empty as her pockets. "There's nothing to save, Mrs. Davis," Sheriff Wilkins said, placing a sympathetic hand on her shoulder. "Lightning strike hit like the devil himself." By the time we spotted it, the whole place was ablaze. Margaret nodded numbly, her slender fingers clutching the gold locket containing a miniature photograph of Joseph, the only possession she had managed to grab before fleeing the burning house. Her dark hair, usually neatly pinned, had come loose in her escape, falling in waves around her shoulders. "Where will you go?" the sheriff asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "I don't know," she whispered, watching as the last wall of her home collapsed in a shower of sparks. "I truly don't know." The next morning found Margaret sitting on a bench outside Porterville's general store, the small carpet bag containing her meager remaining possessions beside her. She had spent the night at the home of a kind neighbor, but pride prevented her from accepting further charity. The town was struggling through a drought, and everyone had their own hardships to bear. She stared at the dusty street, watching as riders came and went, the everyday business of Porterville continuing despite her world having stopped. One rider in particular caught her attention, a tall man with broad shoulders who dismounted from a magnificent chestnut stallion with the easy grace of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. Adam Yates had ridden into Porterville with the intention of restocking supplies, before continuing north to the cattle drive waiting for him in Wyoming. At 35, he had established himself as one of the most reliable trail bosses in the territory, respected for his fair dealings and steady hand. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his face was tanned and lined from years under the harsh western sun. As he secured his horse to the hitching post, Adam's keen blue eyes noticed the woman sitting alone on the bench. There was something in her posture, a mixture of dignity and despair, that made him pause. He'd seen that look before, on the faces of those who had lost everything but weren't yet ready to surrender. Margaret felt his gaze and lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with a quiet defiance that surprised even her. She had no patience for pity today. "Madam," Adam said, tipping his hat respectfully before continuing into the store. Inside, he overheard the storekeeper, Mr. Patterson, speaking with the town doctor. "Terrible shame about the Davis place," the doctor was saying. "First Joseph passes, then the house burns down not 3 days later. Margaret's left with nothing but the clothes on her back." "The widow Davis?" Adam asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "That lady sitting outside, the very same," Mr. Patterson confirmed. "Fine woman. Husband was a good man too, had one of the most promising spreads south of town until the drought hit. They were just starting to recover when he took ill." Adam nodded thoughtfully as he collected his supplies. When he exited the store, he found Margaret still sitting there, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains as if searching for answers in their silent slopes. He hesitated, then approached her. "Mrs. Davis, name's Adam Yates. I couldn't help but overhear about your situation." Margaret looked up, her green eyes wary. "If you're offering charity, Mr. Yates, I must decline. I've accepted enough kindness for one day." Adam shook his head. "Not charity, madam. I'm heading north with a cattle drive in a week's time. My cook just broke his leg and I need someone to feed 20 hungry cowboys. It's hard work, but it pays." Margaret stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering me a job as a trail cook?" "Yes, madam. We'll be on the trail for 2 months to Wyoming. It's dusty, it's rough, but it's honest work." "And you'd have time to figure out your next move." She laughed bitterly. "Mr. Yates, I've lost everything. My husband, my home, my future all gone. What makes you think I can handle a cattle drive?" Adam met her gaze steadily. "Then start with me, it's enough." His words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Margaret studied him, this stranger offering not sympathy but possibility. "I can cook," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. And I'm not afraid of hard work. Adam nodded, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. That's all I need to know. Over the next few days, Margaret prepared for the journey. The women of Porterville rallied around her, providing clothes suitable for the trail and offering advice, much of it conflicting about surviving among a company of cowboys. You'll need to be tough as leather and twice as sharp, advised Mrs. Wilson, the blacksmith's wife. Cowboys respect strength. Nonsense, countered Mrs. Thompson, who ran the boarding house. Just cook decent food and mind your own business. They'll treat you proper or answer to the trail boss. Margaret listened politely, but inside she was terrified. She had never ventured more than 20 miles from Porterville in her entire life. Now she was preparing to travel hundreds of miles across some of the most unforgiving territory in the West. The morning of departure arrived with a spectacular sunrise painting the desert in gold and crimson. Adam had arranged for Margaret to ride in the chuck wagon, alongside Hector, an old Mexican cowhand with a bad leg who would help with the cooking and teach her the ways of the trail. You ever cooked for 20 men before, Senora? Hector asked as they loaded the last of the supplies. I've cooked for church socials, Margaret replied, securing a crate of beans. Can't be that different, can it? Hector's weathered face split into a grin. Church men eat like birds. Cowboys eat like starving wolves, you will see. Adam approached on his chestnut stallion, looking every inch the capable trail boss in his worn leather chaps and dusty hat. Everything set, Mrs. Davis? Yes, Mr. Yates, she replied, straightening her simple calico dress. She had tied her dark hair back in a practical braid and wore a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. We're burning daylight, he called to the assembled cowboys. Move 'em out, and so began Margaret's journey into a new life. The first day was a blur of dust, noise, and backbreaking work. By sunset, her hands were blistered from tending the cooking fire, her back ached from stooping over Dutch ovens, and her ears rang with the constant lowing of cattle and shouted orders of the cowboys. As the men lined up for their evening meal, Margaret served plates of beans, salt pork, and sourdough biscuits with trembling hands, certain they would complain about the simple fare. Instead, the cowboys thanked her politely, many tipping their hats with genuine appreciation. One young cowhand even declared they were the best biscuits he'd had since leaving his mother's kitchen in Texas. After the men had eaten and drifted to their bedrolls, Margaret collapsed onto a stool by the chuck wagon, too exhausted to eat. Adam approached, carrying a plate. You need to eat, Mrs. Davis. Tomorrow's just as long. She accepted the food gratefully. Please call me Margaret. If we're going to be on the trail together for months, Mrs. Davis seems overly formal, he nodded, settling beside her on an upturned crate. Margaret then, and I'm Adam. This is madness, isn't it? She asked suddenly. Me, on a cattle drive, Adam chuckled, the sound warm in the cooling desert night. I've seen madder things work out just fine. You did well today. The biscuits were burnt on the bottom. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, they were smart enough not to mention it. They shared a smile, and for the first time since Joseph's death, Margaret felt a small spark of hope flicker in her chest. Days on the trail fell into a rhythm. Margaret would rise before dawn to start the breakfast fire, work alongside Hector to feed the men, then pack up the chuck wagon and move ahead of the herd to set up for the midday meal. By the time the cattle and cowboys arrived, she would have coffee brewing and simple food ready. Then it was pack up again, race ahead, and prepare the evening camp. The work was relentless, but Margaret found strength she didn't know she possessed. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned, and her confidence grew with each mile they covered. Adam watched her transformation with quiet admiration. He had hired her out of a mixture of compassion and necessity, but she had proven herself invaluable. The men's morale improved with better food, and her calm presence seemed to settle the more rambunctious cowboys. 2 weeks into the journey, they faced their first major challenge when they reached the Carson River crossing. Spring rains had swollen the waters, making the ford treacherous. We'll need to wait it out, Adam decided, surveying the rushing water. A day or two should see it lower enough to cross safely. The forced delay created restlessness among the men. That evening, as Margaret served dinner, she noticed tension in the air. Storm brewing, and I don't mean the weather, Hector murmured, nodding toward a group of cowboys where voices were rising. Two of the men, Conroy, a veteran drover with a quick temper, and Daniel, a younger cowhand, were arguing over a card game. "You're cheating, you snake." Conroy growled, his hand moving toward his gun. Adam was there in an instant, stepping between them. "That's enough. We've got enough troubles without you two shooting each other." "He's been dealing from the bottom all night," Conroy insisted. "I ain't a cheat," Daniel protested. Margaret, watching the confrontation escalate, made a split-second decision. She grabbed a pot and spoon and began banging them together loudly. "Who wants cobbler?" she called out. "Just pulled it from the coals." The unexpected announcement drew everyone's attention. Desserts were rare on the trail, saved for Sundays or special occasions. "Cobbler?" one of the cowboys asked incredulously. "On a Wednesday?" "Well, I had some dried peaches that needed using," Margaret explained, improvising quickly, "and it seemed like a good night for something sweet." The distraction worked. The men abandoned the brewing fight and lined up eagerly for the unexpected treat. As they dispersed with their desserts, the tension dissolved. Adam approached Margaret with a raised eyebrow. "Cobbler," she shrugged. "It was either that or watch them shoot each other. Besides, a little extra sugar might help their dispositions." He laughed then, a full, rich sound that warmed her more than the nearby campfire. "Margaret Davis, you are something else." As the days turned into weeks, the cattle drive pushed northward through increasingly beautiful country. They left the desert behind and entered rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. The nights grew cooler, the stars brighter. During this time, Margaret found herself watching Adam more and more. She admired his quiet leadership, the respect he commanded without raising his voice, the way he knew each cowboy by name and remembered details about their families back home. One evening, as the herd settled for the night and most of the men were already in their bedrolls, Adam lingered by the chuck wagon, helping Margaret clean up. "You don't have to do that," she protested as he gathered dirty plates. "My mother raised me better than to watch a lady work alone," he replied, scraping leftover food into the slop bucket. "Your mother must be quite a woman." Adam nodded, a fond smile crossing his face. "She was. Raised 5 boys after my father was killed in the war. Taught us to respect work and those who do it." "Was?" Margaret asked gently. "She passed 2 winters ago, pneumonia." "I'm sorry," she said, touching his arm briefly. He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. "Loss is part of life out here. You either let it break you or you keep moving forward." "Is that what you're doing, moving forward?" Adam was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "Trying to, same as you, I expect." They stood in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them, crickets chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses. "I never thanked you properly," Margaret said finally, "for giving me a chance when I had nothing." "You've more than earned your keep," Adam assured her. "It's not just the job, it's—" She struggled to find the words. "You saw me as capable when I couldn't see it myself." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits finding each other in the vastness of the frontier. The moment was broken by a shout from one of the night guards. Adam immediately tensed, his hand dropping to his gun. "Stay here," he ordered, striding toward the commotion. Margaret watched anxiously as Adam conferred with the guards, their silhouettes dark against the star-filled sky. After what seemed an eternity, he returned. "Rustlers, possibly," he explained. "Scouts spotted campfires to the north where there shouldn't be any. We'll double the guards tonight and change course tomorrow, just to be safe." True to Adam's prediction, the next day brought trouble. As they were breaking camp, a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard toward them. Adam recognized him as Pete, one of the scouts he'd sent ahead at dawn. "Comanche war party," Pete gasped as he reined in his lathered horse. "About 15 braves headed this way," Adam's face hardened. "How far? 3 miles, maybe less. They've got that look, boss, they're hunting." The news sent a ripple of tension through the camp. The Comanche were fierce warriors, and though major conflicts with settlers had diminished in recent years, small bands still conducted raids. "Get the herd moving now," Adam ordered. "Margaret, you and Hector pack up fast. I want you ahead of the herd with 2 guards." Margaret worked with frantic efficiency, her heart pounding as she helped Hector secure the chuck wagon. Within minutes, they were moving, the wagon jolting over the uneven ground as their driver urged the team to a fast trot. They had covered perhaps a mile when gunshots echoed behind them. Margaret turned to see dust rising from the rear of the herd, where riders were moving in a chaotic pattern. "The raiders," Hector muttered. "They're trying to cut out part of the herd." Margaret clutched the wagon seat as they bounced along, terrified for Adam and the others. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, they crested a small rise and the driver called a halt in a defensible position. "Orders were to wait here," he explained, checking his rifle from their vantage point. They could see the distant battle. The Comanche had indeed tried to separate and drive off a portion of the herd, but Adam and his men had managed to keep the cattle together. Now both groups were exchanging fire from horseback. "Adam's a good strategist," one of their guards commented. "See how he's using the terrain to funnel them where he wants." Margaret could barely make out Adam's figure, but she recognized his chestnut horse as it darted among the others. She found herself praying with an intensity that surprised her, not just for the safety of the drive, but for this man who had become increasingly important to her. The skirmish lasted another half-hour before the Comanche, facing determined resistance and having lost at least one warrior, broke off their attack and disappeared into the distance. When Adam finally rode up to the chuck wagon, Margaret had to stop herself from running to him. His shirt was torn and there was a bloody scrape along his arm, but he was otherwise unharmed. "Everyone all right here?" he asked, scanning their small group. "We're fine," Margaret assured him, "but you're hurt." Adam glanced at his arm as if noticing the injury for the first time. "It's nothing." "Bullet grazed me. It needs cleaning," she insisted. "Infection out here could kill you faster than any Comanche." He didn't argue as she retrieved the medical supplies they kept in the wagon. As she cleaned the wound with water and whiskey, her hands gentle but firm, Adam watched her face. "You handled yourself well today," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything except bounce around in this wagon, terrified," she replied, wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. "You kept calm. That's not nothing." His blue eyes held hers. "Most city women would be having hysterics right about now." "I'm not a city woman," Margaret reminded him, "and hysterics won't keep anyone alive out here." He smiled then, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in her chest. "No, they sure won't." After the Comanche incident, the drive continued northward without major trouble. Days of dust and cattle gave way to nights of campfires and stories. Margaret found herself drawn more and more into the camaraderie of the trail, no longer just the cook, but part of this nomadic community. The cowboys, initially respectful but distant, now treated her with a friendly familiarity. They brought her wildflowers they found on the prairie, helped with heavy lifting around the camp, and even taught her to play poker, though they were careful never to bet more than buttons or matchsticks when she joined their games. And through it all, there was Adam. He never treated her with anything less than respect, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her blush. They found small moments to talk alone while checking supplies, or when she would bring him coffee during his night watch. One evening, about 6 weeks into the journey, a fierce thunderstorm forced them to make early camp near a stand of cottonwood trees. The cattle were nervous with the lightning, requiring all hands to keep them from stampeding. Margaret and Hector worked double time to get a hot meal ready despite the rain. By the time the storm passed and the herd settled, it was fully dark. The cowboys ate quickly and sought their bedrolls, exhausted from battling both cattle and weather. Margaret found herself alone by the fire, the last pot of coffee warming for the night guards. Adam emerged from the darkness, his clothes still damp from the rain. "Coffee smells good," he said, dropping onto a log beside her. She poured him a cup, their fingers brushing as she handed it to him. "Rough day," one of the rougher ones, he agreed, sipping gratefully. "But the herd's intact and none of the men got hurt. I count that as a win." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the drip of rainwater from the trees and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. "We should reach Wyoming in another 2 weeks," Adam said finally. "I've been thinking about what happens after." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She had been avoiding thoughts of the future, living day to day on the trail, but reality couldn't be postponed forever. "I suppose I'll find work in town," she said carefully. "Save up for a while, then maybe head back to Arizona or try California." Adam stared into the fire. "Or you could stay." "Stay," she repeated, uncertain of his meaning. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I've got land outside of Douglas. Good land with water rights and decent grazing. Been building it up for 5 years now." "Adam, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm just saying there's a place for you if you want it. My foreman's wife could use help with the house, and you'd have your own cabin until you decide what you want." Margaret studied his face in the firelight, seeing the earnestness there. "And what is it you want, Adam?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I want you to have choices, Margaret. Real choices, not just the desperate kind that come from having nothing." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. For weeks, she had been fighting her growing feelings for him, telling herself it was too soon after Joseph, that gratitude was coloring her emotions. But sitting here with his calloused hand holding hers, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. "And if one of those choices was you?" she asked softly. Adam's eyes darkened. "That would be my hope." Before she could respond, a shout came from the direction of the herd. Adam was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to his gun. "Stay here," he ordered, striding off into the darkness. Margaret sat frozen, her heart pounding with both fear and the weight of the moment that had just passed between them. After several agonizing minutes, Adam returned with 2 cowboys. "Wolves," he explained. "Drawn by the smell of the chuck wagon, probably, we scared them off." The interruption had broken the spell of intimacy, and neither of them seemed to know how to recapture it. Adam drained his coffee cup and handed it back to her. "Thank you for the coffee," he said formally, "and for listening." "Adam," Margaret called softly as he turned to go. "I'll think about what you said, about Wyoming." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "That's all I ask." The following days brought new challenges as they entered more rugged country. The trail narrowed, forcing the herd to stretch out in a longer line that was harder to manage. Water became scarcer, and tempers grew short among both men and beasts. Margaret threw herself into her work, trying to maintain morale with the best meals she could manage from their dwindling supplies. But her mind constantly returned to Adam's offer and the feelings that had grown between them. Joseph had been a good husband, steady, kind, and hardworking. Their marriage had been one of companionship and mutual respect. But with Adam, she felt something different, a spark that both frightened and exhilarated her. As they made camp one evening in a sheltered valley, Adam announced they would rest for a full day to let the cattle graze and recover their strength before the final push to Wyoming. "There's a small lake just over that rise," he told Margaret after supper. "Good clean water if you want to wash up properly. I've posted guards, so it's safe." The prospect of a real bath after weeks of making do with damp cloths and minimal privacy was too tempting to resist. Margaret gathered soap, a towel, and clean clothes, then made her way to the lake as twilight deepened into night. The water was cold but gloriously clear, reflecting the emerging stars above. Margaret washed quickly, shivering but reveling in the feeling of being truly clean. She had just finished dressing and was combing out her wet hair when she heard a twig snap nearby. "Who's there?" she called, reaching for the small pistol Adam had insisted she carry. "It's just me," Adam's voice came from the darkness. "I was checking the perimeter, didn't mean to startle you." He stepped into view, keeping a respectful distance. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, making him look almost mythical, a figure from some ancient legend of the West. "The water's wonderful," Margaret said, tucking her comb away. "Cold but wonderful. I thought you might appreciate it. Trail life doesn't offer many luxuries," she smiled, gathering her things. "I've stopped noticing most of the hardships, to be honest. It's strange how quickly the extraordinary becomes ordinary." "Is that how you see this life now, as ordinary?" Margaret considered his question. "Not ordinary exactly, but it's become mine. I understand it now in a way I never could have back in Porterville." Adam moved closer, his boots silent on the soft grass. "And when we reach Wyoming, what then?" Her heart quickened at his proximity. I've been thinking about your offer. And I'm not ready to make promises either, Adam. It's been less than 3 months since I lost Joseph, since my whole life burned down around me. But, he prompted softly when she hesitated, but I'd like to see your land. I'd like to see if I could make a place for myself there, on my own terms. Adam's smile was slow and warm in the moonlight. Your own terms are the only ones that matter to me. He reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. The gentle touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. May I? He whispered, his eyes never leaving hers. Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Adam leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. His hands remained at his sides, giving her the freedom to pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, her fingers finding the rough fabric of his shirt. When they finally parted, Margaret felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, like the Earth itself had altered its rotation, changing the alignment of her stars. I should get back to camp, she murmured, though she made no move to step away from him. Yes, Adam agreed, equally motionless. The men will talk if we're both gone too long. Let them talk, Margaret said with sudden boldness. I'm a widow, not a girl, and you're a man of honor. There's no scandal in two adults finding comfort in each other's company. Adam's laugh was warm and rich in the darkness. Margaret Davis, you continue to surprise me at every turn. They walked back to camp together, not touching but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Around the dying campfire, a few cowboys looked up as they approached, but none commented on their arrival together. If knowing glances were exchanged, they were discreet enough to escape notice. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the promise of autumn in the air despite the summer date. The day of rest was a gift to man and beast alike. The cowboys caught up on sleep, mended equipment, and even organized an impromptu horse race across the valley floor, wagering with the fervor of men who had seen too little entertainment for too long. Margaret took the opportunity to do a thorough inventory of their supplies. As she counted sacks of flour and beans, Adam joined her at the chuck wagon. We're running low on coffee, she noted without looking up. And the flour has weevils. We can get fresh supplies in Douglas, he replied. We're only about 10 days out now if the weather holds. She nodded, making a notation in her small leather-bound book. Since joining the drive, she had kept meticulous records of supplies and meals, bringing order to what had previously been Hector's rather haphazard system. What will you do with your earnings? Adam asked, leaning against the wagon wheel. Margaret paused, pencil hovering over the page. I haven't decided. It seems strange to even have choices again. You earned every penny, he assured her. No one works harder than a chuck wagon cook. She smiled at that, closing her book. I was thinking I might buy a sewing machine, a good singer. If I stay in Wyoming, I could take in mending work. Always planning ahead, Adam observed with admiration. You'd have made a fine general. Women make do with the battlefields available to them, Mr. Yates, she replied with a hint of teasing in her voice. Kitchens, sick rooms, birthing chambers, we fight our wars where we can. His expression grew serious. You fought yours with more courage than most men I know. Before she could respond, Hector approached with news that one of the cowboys had fallen from his horse during the race and might have broken his arm. Margaret immediately gathered medical supplies and followed him to where the injured man lay. The cowboy, a lanky Texan named Nate, had indeed broken his arm just above the wrist. With Adam holding the limb steady, Margaret set the bone as gently as possible, then splinted and wrapped it tightly. You've done this before, Adam commented as they walked away, leaving Nate resting with a dose of laudanum to ease the pain. My father was a doctor, Margaret explained. He insisted all his children learn basic medical care, said it might save a life someday in a place where doctors were scarce. He was right about that. Adam studied her with newfound appreciation. You're full of hidden talents, Mrs. Davis. Not so hidden anymore, she pointed out. Life on the trail has a way of revealing what we're really made of. That evening, as the men gathered around the campfire, someone produced a battered harmonica and began playing a slow, mournful tune. Others joined in with deep voices singing of home and lost loves. Margaret, sitting slightly apart as was her custom, found herself unexpectedly moved by the simple music. Adam approached and held out his hand. "Dance with me," she stared at him in surprise. "Here, now, why not?" His eyes twinkled with challenge in the firelight. "Unless you don't know how." "I know how," she retorted, standing and placing her hand in his. "Though it's been some time." The cowboys whistled and cheered as Adam led her into the open space before the fire. He placed his hand respectfully at her waist, holding her other hand in his, and began to guide her in a slow waltz. Margaret followed his lead, the steps returning to her muscles as if she had danced only yesterday. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" she asked as they turned gracefully. "I wasn't always a cowboy," he replied with a grin. "My mother insisted we all learn proper dancing. Said no son of hers would embarrass a lady on a dance floor. She was a wise woman." "The wisest," he agreed softly, as they danced under the vast canopy of stars with rough cowboys providing the music and curious cattle as their audience. Margaret felt a joy she had thought lost forever. When Adam pulled her slightly closer, his hand warm and strong at her waist, she didn't resist. The music shifted to a livelier tune, and soon other cowboys were dancing too with each other in the absence of female partners, laughing and stomping in exaggerated parodies of formal dancing. The impromptu celebration continued late into the night, a much-needed release of the tensions of the trail. When Margaret finally retired to her small tent near the chuck wagon, she fell asleep with the memory of Adam's arms around her and his smile warming her dreams. The final days of the drive brought a new energy to the company. Men who had been trail-weary for weeks found renewed vigor as familiar landmarks appeared. The cattle seemed to sense the approaching end of their journey as well, moving more willingly and requiring less prodding. One morning, as they broke camp under a sky-promising rain, Adam announced they would reach Douglas by nightfall the following day. "We'll deliver the herd to the stockyards day after tomorrow," he told the assembled cowboys. "You'll get your pay then, and the customary 2 days of liberty before those of you heading back start the return journey." His eyes found Margaret's across the group. They hadn't spoken privately since their dance, both of them busy with the increasing demands of the final push. But something had changed between them, a certainty that hadn't been there before, an understanding that required no words. The day passed in a flurry of activity. Margaret and Hector prepared a special meal, using the last of their supplies to create a feast celebrating their successful journey. The men ate with enthusiasm, sharing stories of previous drives and plans for spending their earnings in town. After dinner, as the cowboys drifted off to their bedrolls or night watch duties, Adam approached Margaret where she sat mending a torn shirt by the fire. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. She set aside her sewing and rose to join him. They strolled away from the camp in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking the sleeping herd. "So tomorrow we reach Wyoming," Margaret said, gazing out at the silvery landscape painted by the rising moon. "My foreman will meet us outside town," Adam replied. "He'll take you to the ranch if you're still of a mind to see it." "I am." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Margaret, before we get there, I need to say something." She waited, her heart suddenly racing. "When I found you sitting outside that store in Porterville, I had no idea how much you would come to mean to me," he began, his voice low and earnest. "I've spent 15 years on the frontier, seen men and women come and go, but never met anyone with your kind of strength." "Adam, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing from losing Joseph, but I want you to know that whenever you're ready, whether that's months from now or years, I'll be waiting. Because I love you, Margaret Davis. I think maybe I started falling in love with you the moment you looked up at me with those defiant green eyes and told me you didn't want my charity." Margaret felt tears well up, but they weren't tears of grief this time. "It's not too soon," she whispered. Adam's breath caught. "What?" "Loving you doesn't diminish what I had with Joseph," she said, finding words for feelings she'd been struggling to understand. "It's different, but no less real. When I lost everything, I thought my heart died too, but you were right that day in Porterville. You were enough to start again." Adam reached for her then, pulling her into his arms with a tenderness that belied his strength. His kiss was different from the one they'd shared by the lake, deeper, more certain, filled with promise. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Is this really happening?" he murmured. Margaret laughed softly. "It seems it is." They returned to camp hand in hand, no longer concerned with who might see or what they might think. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, but tonight was for acknowledging what had grown between them on the long journey from loss to love. The following day dawned cool and clear, perfect weather for the final leg of their journey. The mood among the company was jubilant as they broke camp for the last time. Even the cattle seemed to move with more purpose, perhaps sensing the end of their long trek. By mid-afternoon, the first buildings of Douglas came into view on the horizon. It was a modest frontier town, but after months on the trail, it looked like a metropolis to Margaret's eyes. As Adam had predicted, they made camp outside town with plans to drive the herd to the stockyards in the morning. True to Adam's word, his foreman was waiting for them, a solid, middle-aged man named Robert Peterson, who greeted his boss with obvious respect and Margaret with polite curiosity. "Mrs. Davis has been our chuck wagon cook," Adam explained. "She'll be staying at the ranch for a while." If Peterson was surprised by this arrangement, he hid it well. "The missus will be pleased to have another woman around," he said, tipping his hat to Margaret. "She's been alone out there with just me and the hands for company since spring." That evening, as the Cowboys celebrated their arrival with an extra ration of whiskey, Adam took Margaret aside. "I need to see the herd delivered and the men paid tomorrow," he said. "But Robert can take you to the ranch now if you prefer, rather than spending another night in camp." Margaret considered the offer. Part of her was eager to see this place Adam had spoken of, to begin this new chapter of her life. But another part was reluctant to leave the trail and the man who had come to mean so much to her. "I'll wait," she decided. "We started this journey together. We should finish it the same way." The relief in Adam's smile told her she'd made the right choice. "One more night of trail food and hard ground then," he teased. "I've grown rather fond of both," she admitted. "Though I won't object to sleeping in a real bed tomorrow night." His eyes darkened at her words, and the air between them suddenly seemed charged with possibility. But he merely nodded and stepped back, ever the gentleman. "Tomorrow, then," he said softly. The next morning brought the controlled chaos of driving the herd into town and through to the stockyards. Margaret watched from the chuck wagon as Adam and his men expertly guided the cattle through Douglas's Main Street, townspeople lining the boardwalks to watch the spectacle. At the stockyards, the cattle were counted and inspected, paperwork was signed, and payment was made. Adam gathered his cowboys for a final address, distributing their earnings and thanking them for their service. Many would return with him for the journey back to Arizona, while others would seek new employment or visit family in the area. By late afternoon, Adam had completed his business and returned to where Margaret waited with the chuck wagon. "It's done," he announced, a mixture of satisfaction and weariness in his voice. "The drive is officially over. Successful?" She asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. "Very. We lost fewer than 20 head and not a single man. That's as good as it gets in this business." He reached for her hand. "Ready to see your new home?" The word home sent a flutter through Margaret's chest. "Yes," she replied simply. They left the chuck wagon in town to be restocked for the return journey and rode out together on horseback, following the North Platte River westward. After about an hour, they crested a rise and Adam reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Margaret gasped at the sight. A sturdy two-story house of hewn logs stood in a protected hollow, surrounded by smaller outbuildings and corrals. A creek ran through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods that had turned golden with the approaching autumn. Beyond stretched rolling grasslands that seemed to continue forever, broken only by distant blue mountains on the horizon. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's not grand," Adam said, watching her reaction carefully. "But it's good land and the house is solid. I built it thinking someday it might be a family home." The implication in his words made her heart race. "Show me," she urged, eager to see this place he had created. They rode down into the valley, greeted by barking dogs and the Petersons' wife, Nancy, a cheerful woman in her 40s who welcomed Margaret with genuine warmth. "Lord, it's good to have another woman here," she declared, ushering Margaret into the house while Adam saw to the horses. "I've aired out the cabin for you, but you'll take supper with us in the main house." The cabin turned out to be a snug one-room structure near the main house, simply but comfortably furnished with a bed, a small table and chairs, a cook stove, and a rocking chair by the window. Someone had placed a jar of wildflowers on the table and laid a colorful quilt on the bed. "It's perfect," Margaret told Nancy sincerely. "I can't thank you enough." "No thanks needed," the older woman assured her. "Adam told Robert in his letters that you were the best chuck wagon cook he'd ever hired, and that you saved the drive more than once with your level head. Anyone who can manage 20 cowboys and a herd of cattle is welcome here." After washing away the dust of travel and changing into her cleanest dress, Margaret joined the others for supper in the main house. The meal was simple but abundant, and the conversation flowed easily as Adam and Robert discussed the ranch and plans for the coming winter. As the evening wore on, Margaret found herself watching Adam in this new setting. He was different here, more relaxed, more at home in his own skin. This was his domain, the place he had built from nothing, and his pride in it was evident in every gesture. When the meal ended, Adam walked Margaret back to her cabin under a sky blazing with stars. "What do you think?" he asked as they reached her door. "Could you be happy here?" Margaret looked around at the peaceful valley, then back at the man beside her. "I already am happy here," she said truthfully. Adam's smile was tender as he reached out to touch her cheek. "May I call on you properly tomorrow, take you riding, show you the rest of the ranch?" The formality of his request made her laugh. "After 2 months on the trail together, you're asking to call on me. This is different," he insisted. "I want to do this right, Margaret." She covered his hand with hers, turning her face to kiss his palm. "Yes, Adam Yates, you may call on me tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as you wish." His kiss was gentle but held a promise of passion carefully restrained. When he finally stepped back, his voice was husky. "Good night, Margaret, sleep well." "Good night, Adam," she replied, entering her cabin with a heart so full she thought it might burst. As autumn gave way to winter, Margaret settled into life on the Yates Ranch. She helped Nancy with the household management, took over much of the cooking, and even began teaching the ranch hands children 3 afternoons a week in a makeshift school in one of the outbuildings. Adam courted her properly, as he had promised. They rode together exploring the vast property, picnicked by the creek when weather permitted, and spent evenings reading aloud or playing chess by the fire. He was patient, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, though his feelings were plain in every look and gesture. For her part, Margaret found herself falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Adam was everything Joseph had been: kind, honorable, hardworking, but there was also a passion between them that she had never experienced before. When he kissed her, which he did with increasing frequency as the weeks passed, she felt alive in ways she hadn't known were possible. The first snow came in early November, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. On a clear, cold Sunday after the morning chores were complete, Adam asked Margaret to walk with him to a hilltop overlooking the property. "It's freezing," she protested laughingly as he led her up the snowy path. "What's so important it can't wait until spring?" "You'll see," he replied mysteriously, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. At the summit, where they could see the entire valley spread below them, Adam turned to face her. His expression was solemn, but his eyes shone with an emotion that made Margaret's heart skip. "I brought you here because this is my favorite place on the whole ranch," he began. "From here you can see everything, where we've been and where we might go. It seemed fitting." "Fitting for what?" Margaret asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Adam took her gloved hands in his. "Margaret Davis, when you came into my life, I was a man who thought he had everything he needed. I had my land, my cattle, my reputation as a fair dealer. I wasn't looking for more." He paused, his blue eyes intent on hers. "But then there you were, sitting on that bench in Porterville with your whole world in ashes around you, still holding your head high. And something in me recognized something in you, a strength, a determination to keep going no matter what life throws at you. Adam dropped to one knee in the snow, still holding her hands. "I love you, Margaret. I love your courage, your kindness, your sharp mind, and your gentle heart. I love the way you faced down a cattle drive without flinching, and the way you've made this ranch more of a home in 3 months than I managed in 5 years." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Inside was a gold ring set with a modest diamond that caught the winter sunlight. "I'm asking you to be my wife," he said simply. "To build a life here with me, to face whatever comes together. Will you marry me, Margaret?" Tears filled her eyes, freezing on her lashes in the cold air. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Adam, yes." He rose and slipped the ring onto her finger over her glove, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that warmed them both despite the winter chill. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Margaret looked down at the ring now adorning her hand. "It's beautiful. It was my mother's," Adam explained. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman with a strong heart and gentle hands. You're the only one who's ever fit that description." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, planning their future together. They would marry in the spring, when travel was easier and Adam's brothers could attend. The main house would be their home, with rooms for children they both hoped would follow. The ranch would grow, with Margaret's careful management complementing Adam's vision. As they reached the edge of the yard, Adam stopped and turned to her once more. "Are you happy, truly happy?" Margaret looked at this man who had offered her a new beginning when she had nothing, who had seen value in her when she could see none in herself, who loved her with a steadiness that anchored her soul. "When I told you I had lost everything," she said softly, "you told me to start with you, that it would be enough. You were right, Adam, you were more than enough. You were everything I didn't know I needed." Their kiss, witnessed only by the silent winter landscape, sealed a promise that had begun months before on a dusty street in Porterville and would continue for all the days of their lives. By spring, Margaret Davis became Margaret Yates in a simple ceremony performed in the newly built church in Douglas. Adam's brothers traveled from as far as Texas to attend, and many of the cowboys from the cattle drive returned to celebrate with them. Even Sheriff Wilkins made the journey from Porterville, bringing news that the town had finally recovered from the drought. As years passed, the Yates ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Adam's fair business practices and Margaret's careful management turned their property into one of the most successful in the territory. They added modern conveniences to the house as they became available, a proper cooking range, glass windows, even a telephone in later years. Children came first, a son they named Joseph, in honor of Margaret's first husband, then twin daughters who inherited their mother's green eyes and their father's determined spirit. The ranch became known not just for its fine cattle, but for its hospitality, its Christmas celebrations drawing people from miles around. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the work was done, Adam and Margaret would sit on the porch watching their children play in the yard. He would take her hand, the gold ring still shining on her finger, and they would remember that long-ago day in Porterville when a desperate widow and a kind-hearted cowboy had found in each other exactly what they needed to begin again, and it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything,